So much of what is good in our lives came about because 2,000 years ago, Jesus of Nazareth turned the world upside down. The historical record is unmistakably clear. No other cultural influence, no other social movement, no other teaching, philosophy, or religion has done more to promote the well-being of more people than Christianity.
If you're in Matthew chapter 5, we'll be looking at verse 13, where Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It's then good for nothing, but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your God in heaven," your Father, he says. Now, most of you in this room are probably unfamiliar with Dutch philosopher and Christian scholar Desiderius Erasmus Rotterdamus. He was born in, anybody? Yeah, 1467, that's right. Yeah, no. Few people have heard of him, but probably everybody knows what he said. He said, "Women, you can't live with them?" Do you know the rest? Yeah, of course you do. Can't live without them. Now, I can't say that I agree, Desiderius, but I've lived with one now for 17 years, and I wouldn't trade that away. So I can live with a woman. And I might have agreed to a greater degree had he substituted the term woman for Christian disciple. Disciple of Christ. Can't live with them, can't live without them. That's the world's attitude toward the Christian. There is a great similarity here, as Jesus notes, between Christians and salt and light. The world might think that they can do without, but little do they realize their life depends on our being here. We're like salt and light, Jesus says. The human race doesn't always realize how dependent they are upon the existence of salt and light, let alone Christ's disciples. And because it's the true disciples of Jesus that, very much like salt and very similar to light, we serve a purpose. And oftentimes we're greatly underappreciated by the world in which we live. Salt and light, I'll let you make the connection here, have been around for so long now, quietly serving the human race, generation after generation, with little fanfare. We kind of have lost touch with how bad things might be without them. I'll tell you that if it weren't for salt and if it weren't for light, life on earth would be bland and barren. It would be corrupt. And it would be cold. So too, if it weren't for believers, true disciples, there would be quite literally an apocalypse. If you don't believe me, take all the Christians away and see what happens. We'll find out sooner or later. This world needs Jesus' people more than even, I believe, Jesus' people realize sometimes. Do you understand how desperately the world needs you, Christian? That's why Jesus says what he does in these verses. You are the salt of the earth. It's a heavy responsibility if we understand what he's saying here. Perhaps it escapes our attention because salt is a little less important to us, or maybe a little more taken for granted in our day and age, our culture, than it was for them. Salt was extremely important to those in ancient civilizations. In Israel, you may remember, that salt was a necessary part of their sacrificial system. Leviticus 2:13 instructs the Israelites that they are to use salt in their sacrifices. Even in the secular world, Roman soldiers were paid in salt. You ever heard the expression, that man is worth his salt, or he isn't worth his salt? They were paid with salt. Our word salary comes from the Latin word for salt, if I'm to be correct. History proves that entire economies have been built on salt. Wars have been fought over salt. Before the days of refrigeration, where fresh food wasn't available, life and death in many cases was decided by salt. We know biologically that the lack of salt in the body can lead to muscle cramps, nausea, vomiting, and dizziness, eventually leading to shock and coma and death. Salt is important. It's very useful. It's good to have around. And so are Christians. For 3 reasons I'll give you this morning. And Christians are beneficial to the world. The world benefits from our ministry first by our presence, just by our being here. Close up and personal, I'll say, by our infusing ourselves into their life, by our presence. You know that salt has no influence from afar. It has to make contact. If there's going to be any benefit, if it's going to preserve meat, the dead meat has to be rubbed with salt on both sides. If it isn't, you'll be sorry in time. Jesus doesn't expect us to convert anyone and everyone that we come into contact with. What he expects from us is to make contact, because that's his means of converting them. A lot of us, we carry such a weight on our shoulders thinking we need to make everybody a Christian. You don't. You just need to be where non-Christians are. Your very presence will have a great influence on them. You have to be out there. Sometimes I think that, like grains of salt, we're all stuck in the same shaker together, and we do no good for anybody because there we are in our own little glass jar. It isn't until that shaker gets turned upside down and shaken out that the grains disperse where they're meant to be distributed. And like Christians, we must do the same, where we each go our own way and do the work that we've been commissioned to do, which speaks against the kind of cloistering that seems to be a temptation among the Christian community, where we all sort of gather together and hunker down and enjoy Jesus, but we have no real influence in the world. We shelter ourselves because, it's hard out there, and my Christian sensibilities are offended when I'm with unbelievers, and so we just stick together. That would be to miss the point here. Vance Havner, a man of great faith in the past, said, "We must be willing to be rubbed into the decaying carcass of our unregenerate society." That's a good illustration, because that's exactly what Christ has commissioned us to do when he says, "You are the salt of the earth." We are to be a preservative. The second way in which we function as salt in this world, not only by means of our presence, but also in how we speak. In Colossians chapter 4, verse 6, the Apostle Paul says, "Walk in wisdom toward outsiders," or toward unbelievers, "and let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt." If you've ever read that verse, you might go, "What is that? Seasoned with salt? How do I allow the way I talk to be seasoned with salt?" One of the things I learned in studying this week was interesting and appropriate to the discussion here. Salt was used, apparently, once upon a time as a figure of speech in the ancient world of sparkling conversation. Salt was a sort of metaphor for sparkling conversation, speech dotted with witty or clever remarks. So in this context, what Paul is saying here is we apply salt to those conversations that are spiritually bland. We apply salt, so to speak, to chats that would otherwise degrade into forms of gossip, be corrupt with expressions of criticism and anger, and other forms of unwholesome talk. We act as a preservative by seasoning our speech with this kind of salt, so that when the unbeliever hears salty conversation like ours, it creates thirst in them. They should be left wanting more. They have heard what you have to say. They've gotten your take on whatever the issue is that you've discussed, and they'd like to hear more on this. The Apostle Paul found himself in positions like that, speaking with people, and Well, they'd be a little bit unnerved by the things he had to say because his speech was so heavy on the salt. They would say, we'd like to hear more from you on this, but just not right now, right? Because a tongue can only tolerate so much salt at once. Third, more than just our presence, because I think that's a little too easy, and even more than just the way we speak is, of course, our behavior. Salt purifies. It has that ability. It preserves things from corruption. It flavors food. It's also an antiseptic. It's been said that there are over 14,000 industrial uses for salt. But please don't forget in all our discussion here of salt that salt is salty. I mean, I don't want to be overly simplistic here, but salt is salty and not everybody likes it. I think Christian speech, the way we talk, is more irritating than just us being there quietly. But Christian behavior tops it all. The way we act is to be as salt in this world, and that might not please the palate of those who are around you. And you already know this, I don't need to tell you, but it's for that very reason that many Christians like to play the part of sugar rather than salt. If you take a little bit in each hand, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, but the world certainly can. And the world would enjoy you to function as salt for them, to be a little more pleasing to their corrupt palate than salt might be. And some of us have taken the world's cues, and therefore the world doesn't hate you like Jesus said they would. Because nobody hates sweets, and you're just too sweet. Some Christians are called to be salt, but rather they're the sugar of the earth. They make everybody happy because they're always only pleasant. And in truth, the only thing you're ever offering the world are empty spiritual calories. They're wasting away. They're already getting muscle cramps because of you. Nausea, dehydration, and you know what they're headed for is coma and death. You know how much of the world is in a spiritual coma right now because there is no Christian influence around them, even though they're surrounded by supposed Christians. And you might be one of them. You wake them up from their slumber with a little salty speech, some seasoned behavior, because apparently your presence isn't going far enough. Though we do function as salt in all three areas: presence, speech, and behavior. Salt is very useful to man. I've already pointed that out. And I want to remind you that you are useful to Jesus as well. If, this is a big condition here, if you don't lose the properties that make you distinct. As soon as salt loses the properties that set it apart from sugar, it's worthless. So too with a Christian. Jesus says it himself. He says, if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It's good for nothing. It's to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You can salt meat. You can salt fish, right? You can salt potatoes. You can salt watermelon. My dad used to salt watermelon. I don't know what the deal was, but people do that. You put salt on anything except for salt. You can't salt salt. It would be useless. Now, to be technical, pure salt can't lose its flavor. But the salt in old Israel that Jesus is referring to, the salt that everyone would have understood clearly, would have had trace amounts of earth in it. And salt like that can. They would mine their salt from the shores of the Dead Sea, and it would be mixed with some impurities, of course, different minerals. And he was referring to that kind of salt because too high a percentage of earthliness in that product, it becomes worthless. And then they would, as a practice, throw it out. It'd be put on footpaths and sidewalks. It was kind of like gravel. You ever eat gravel with your potatoes? Nobody would do that. What's it good for? What's gravel good for? We all know. You put it on a path and it's good to be trampled underfoot by men. And this is Jesus' analogy. And so what he's saying here is the more like dirt salt becomes, the more likely it is that it'll be treated like dirt. And so to carry this over to the spiritual realm, he's telling us the more like the world we become, the more likely you are to lose yourself in it. So please understand, it's a mistake to think that you can win the world, that you can win the worldly over to your side by becoming like them. That's a misnomer. Oh, we all understand that Paul became all things to all men that he might win some, but he didn't do it by acquiring all of their worldliness. He didn't become worldly. He spoke out against worldliness. We have to find a way to infiltrate the world as Christians without losing any of our properties that make us distinct. And some of you don't have that ability. You need to know where you're weak and not go there. It would be foolish to think that you could go into some venues and spend all your time with some people and really just begin to do all the things that the world does and you not become impure yourself. Did you know that you can be both dear to Jesus and worthless to Him at the same time? You may be dear to Him right now. I'd suggest that you are. And you might also be worthless to Him. Good for nothing. That's His assessment. I love you, and you're good for nothing. Lot was, do you know who Lot was? Abraham's nephew? Worthless. Bible says he was a righteous man, and he lived in a corrupt environment, and his righteous soul was tormented day by day by the things that he saw and heard. But he did Sodom no good, did he? Sodom was destroyed. Destroyed with what? Salt. So if the world isn't going to be served by you and I with a little bit of salt here and there, God will eventually do it in a way that they cannot recover from. And you know what the last thing Lot witnessed was as he's running away? The sound of screaming and death all behind him. Even his own wife, who had become impure herself. Too much worldliness to have done any good. Lot's lucky to get out of Sodom alive. His wife was turned into a pillar of salt. No doubt God was trying to prove a point there. Be distinct, Christian. It's going to take bravery. But you mustn't be afraid to be unlike the world. Don't be like the world. Come up from among them and be separate, Jesus says. Be distinct. Be unique. In many respects, that's what the word holy means. And when God says be holy like I'm holy, He's saying be different. Be unique. It's the only chance the world has. And again, you may be dear to Jesus and yet worthless. So this isn't a question of your salvation. This is a question of their salvation. And of course, we don't like to think that the salvation of anybody out there would be contingent upon our choices, but I dare say that it almost is. Ultimately, this is on God, but we cannot dismiss our responsibility here. What did Jesus say in verse 13? Who's the salt of the earth? Who? You. You. He goes on to say, you're the light of the world. Now we know that elsewhere Jesus said He was the light of the world, but He doesn't here. He puts that full weight on you and I. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Now the prophet Isaiah long, long ago spoke of the future Messiah, hundreds of years before Jesus ever arrived. He spoke of this Messiah prophetically as a light to the nations. A light. Malachi also, Old Testament prophet, referred to this coming Messiah, Jesus, as the Son of Righteousness. Not the Son, S-O-N, like the Son of God. No, Son of Righteousness, S-U-N. He is the Son of Righteousness. Now, something I know of the sun is that it's a star, and of all the stars in our galaxy, along with all the other 2 trillion galaxies combined, you can Google it, there are 2 trillion, because someone counted. Must be an estimate. Of all the 2 trillion galaxies combined, no star is important to the human race as the sun. And Jesus is referred to as the light of the nations, the Son of righteousness. And the Jews took a hold of that idea that was kind of presented by Isaiah and Malachi. And by the time Jesus ever showed up, they had been giving that title, Light of the World, to their most eminent rabbis. The best teachers of all Israel were called the lamps of the universe. And I'm sure that was a very lofty title, something of great respect and all. But suddenly Jesus comes along here and he preaches this thing in Matthew chapter 5 and says, you are the light of the world. Now, who's he talking to? Is he talking to the most eminent of rabbis? No, he's actually talking to a bunch of working class peasants, just sheep farmers and factory workers and fishermen, all up until chapter 4, verse 16, had been sitting in darkness. And all of a sudden, Jesus comes along and goes, you're the light of the world. So he takes people that were long sitting in darkness, right? Chapter 4, verse 16, you look at it. And the difference that he makes in their life in such a short time is that they then go from darkness to light, children of darkness to children of light. They become the light of the world. And I think that this was shocking to the people that were hearing this, not just the Pharisees and the scribes and the well-to-do in the spiritual world, but also the fishermen and the sheep farmers that Jesus was pointing at, his disciples. You're the light of the world. Reminds us of the fact that Jesus doesn't really count us useful because of what we do for him, but rather what he's able to do in and through us. Okay? So let's not get this backward. When he says, you're the light of the world, we don't need to, like the eminent rabbis would have done, Oh, that makes me important. No, we're not important. We're not important. A light bulb without electricity is very unimportant. Okay? Jesus doesn't specify here whether he considers us to be the sun, like he said of what was said of him in Malachi 4:2. It doesn't tell us if he's kind of thinking of us as the moon, which I would think that there's some similarities there. Maybe the stars, I don't know. Maybe all of them could be true. The sun brings life. We should too. The sun provides warmth and illumination, right? We can see stuff thanks to the sun. The same should be true of us. People can see thanks to our ministry. If he's speaking of the stars, I guess that would be appropriate because stars provide direction. Christian disciples ought to be doing that for those that are lost. The stars decorate the night sky with mystery and beauty. I mean, if you look up at the sky on a clear night, something nice about that. If it was the moon that he had in mind, I guess that would be appropriate too. The moon brings gravitational stability to the whole planet. And something interesting about the moon that you probably already know is that it isn't really a source of light itself. It simply reflects the light that the sun shines. We should be doing the same. I got no light in myself. Neither do you. But we can reflect the light that Christ imparts. So I don't know. Sun, moon, stars, nobody knows. But what we do know is that none of those heavenly bodies can avoid being seen. We've all seen the sun. We've all seen the moon. And we've all seen the stars. And so the whole world knows who they are. And Jesus says, you too, like a city on a hill. You are highly visible when you live like Jesus desires you to live. If you shine like you should, you'll be seen by everybody. You'll be hard to not notice by everybody. Not just those that are attracted to the light, not just those who are attracted to the truth of Christ, but those who want to extinguish it. That's why we try not to catch too much attention sometimes. Because that phrase that Jesus speaks when he tells us that we're going to be persecuted. That's why we're so tempted to dim the light that we shine. It's true in nature as well as it is in the spirit world. Moths only attack those bulbs that shine the brightest, right? You turn off the switch and they stop going after it. They'll quit. In verse 15, Jesus again alludes to the fact that concealing the light will make it worthless. He says nobody lights a lamp and puts it under a basket. They set it on a lampstand up high where it can be best utilized. And it gives light to all who are in the house. So let your light shine, he says. Let it so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Interesting that he says, let your light shine. The emphasis that he's placing here is not on the shining, but on the effort we make to not conceal it. Let it shine. Let it shine. He's placing emphasis on not covering it up, not hiding who you are in Christ. That's always the temptation. We don't need to make ourselves shine. We already have what we need in order to do so. That will happen as naturally as it does for the sun. If Christ is in you, the Bible says that you are a child of light. But here Jesus is saying, let it shine then. It would be absurd to light a candle and put it under a basket. That's a fire hazard, if I'm not mistaken. You burn the place down. He says nobody would do that. Some people, though, are doing it anyway, hiding under the basket. Shining isn't the problem here. Suppression is. And some of us were suppressing what the Holy Spirit would have us do among those who need the light most desperately. We do it for reasons of fear. We allow sometimes peer pressure to get the best of us. Deceit, thinking that, well, God doesn't care one way or the other. No, you've been lied to. Well, I don't really need to. No, you've been lied to. It's a must. They desperately need. So sometimes it's laziness. We just don't care whether we shine or not. Oftentimes it's unconfessed sin. That's a darkness in and of itself, and you will not shine when there is unconfessed sin remaining. These are all baskets, if you will, under which the light of Christ is being kept back from the people in your life who need it the most, okay? 1 Thessalonians 5:5 says, you are children of light. You are children of the day. We're not of the night. We're not of the darkness, okay? That would be the world we're trying to reach. So he says, don't sleep. Don't fall asleep. Don't be unconscious of this as others are. But let us be awake and be sober so that we can have an influence on the world like the sun does, like the moon does, like the stars do. The world can't live without us any more than it can live without the sun. Do you believe that? Without the influence of Christians, this world will be set on a trajectory so dark and so hopeless, it will take a short 7 years for it to be absolutely destroyed. 7 years. And even though there will be some, I'm speaking of course, the end times when Christians are raptured off the face of the earth and the earth is left without us. That sets the earth on a trajectory that will last for a mere 7 years before Christ comes back and just obliterates what's left. Then he sets up his own kingdom and goes on from there. But this world needs us, guys. The world needs our works to be noticeable. Jesus says, let your works be done in such a way that they're seen. Let your works be done in such a way that they're seen, so that God may be glorified by it. Our works need to be noticeable. 1 Timothy 5:25 says, good deeds, good works are obvious. And even those that aren't obvious can't remain hidden forever. Sooner or later, they're going to be seen. They will be noticed. They should be noticed. God has given us a job to do. Christ has commissioned us, even here before the Great Commission, to be like light. We're designed to shine. to be noticed by the world for the way that we live, and because of the way that we live, prevent this world from further decay, to cast the light of Christ on those who still sit in darkness to this very day. And that is our task. It's no more appropriate for a Christian to be without good works than for a star to be without light. Is it even a star if it doesn't shine? It's doubtful. It's true that some stars will shine brighter than others. We look up at the sky and we can see that. It's the bright ones that tend to get the most attention, the dim ones that kind of recede into the background. But all stars will shine. The question is this morning whether you are. And if so, how brightly are you shining? If indeed your light is dim, you might ask yourself why. How long has it been that way, and is it getting worse? My kids have on their ceiling in their bedrooms, both of them have little plastic stars cut out of, they put them up there, and then they glow. And so when we put them to bed at night, sometimes I look up and I'm like, this is so cool. I kind of want them in my bedroom, but I don't know. I thought it'd be kind of cool to take those and to just cut them into tiny pieces and glue them best you can into the pattern of the real sky, because I have a lot of time. And so anyway, they've got those stars, and you've probably seen them before, but you know that they aren't lights in and of themselves, those little plastic things, but they do have something unique about them in that they're able to take and store the energy from the light in the room while it's still on, and then continue to shine even when that light is not seen anymore. They get dimmer and dimmer as the night goes on because the light has been off for too long. And I wonder if that's kind of the case with some of us. You can only shine in relation to how much energy you've soaked up from the original source. I don't think Christians will shine very bright in the dark if they have little exposure to Christ in the light. The key to shining brightly in this world for you and I is to have unbroken communion with Christ. And what I mean by that is having a genuine relationship with God through Jesus that isn't interfered with by your religion any more than your job or your hobbies or anything else in your life that would sort of serve as a blockade to knowing Christ more deeply. I don't know. I think that for the most part, this church, we're avid Bible readers, and we take in a lot of truth in books and in Bible. But I don't know, because I'm not there with you. That might be a problem for some of you. You don't read the Bible enough. You just simply don't. Congratulations, you're dim. You might like Jesus, so that's great. And you might think that you've got just something really strong with him. But I'm telling you that if you don't have a regular intake of truth, it's no different in the spiritual sense than it would be to have a very irregular and inconsistent intake of, food in the physical realm. You're starving. You're starving. And a thin little star like that ain't going to shine very bright. Some of you, you're very inconsistent about being with God's people. You come to church when you can. And when you're here, you don't stick around. And you won't invest. Congratulations, you're dim. I'm sorry. But one of the ways to draw close to Christ is to really draw close to his people. I learned that a long time ago. I never set out to be a pastor, just so you're aware of that. I set out to be close to God's people, and then they pushed me into the pulpit. Thanks, guys. There are certain things that we should be doing and paying close attention to in our personal lives, because one of the things that we're not paying any attention to at all is whether we're shining or not. I don't think the sun sits around and thinks all day about how it's shining. You know who thinks about the sun? Us. We're the ones that notice it. It's just up there doing what it does. But we're the ones that see it. So you might not know whether you're shining or not, Christian, but the world does. The world can see. The world can taste salt when it has a mouthful, right? And so if the world is indifferent to you, it's because you're indifferent to it. That's not healthy for anybody, you or them. But the truth is they depend upon you. The world needs us, because guess what? Jesus went home. 2,000 years ago, Jesus ascended. That means he left planet Earth. Goodbye. He said, I won't be there physically anymore, but I'm going to put my spirit inside of people who are. And they will be my hands, they will be my feet, they will be my mouth, they will do my work. And if they don't do that, my work won't get done, and the world will die and go to hell. You're the salt. You're the light. And if we dismiss that responsibility because, well, Jesus said he's the light, we've put way too much on him when he right here put all of that on us. Daniel chapter 12, verse 3, he wrote something very insightful. He says, those who are wise will shine as bright as the sky. Those who lead many to righteousness will shine like the stars forever. That's beautiful. Are you wise this morning? Shining bright like the sky? Are you leading people to righteousness? Some of us, we don't even like that concept. Lead people to righteousness, or like Solomon said in Proverbs, win souls, like a game. You feel like you feel creepy, like trying to go to work tomorrow and win them. Lead them to righteousness, like it's none of your business. It actually is your business. Go win souls. Go lead many to righteousness. You'd be a fool to allow that kind of a thought to stop you from doing the work that the Creator God commissioned you to do. Well, I don't want to, as a son, tell people that they should believe in Jesus, like that's the only way. It is the only way, and you claim to have it. So to withhold that from people who need it is beyond cruel. At the very least, it's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's like putting a basket over the light. Why would you even turn the light on? It's weights of electricity. But we do it all the time. And Jesus says, the citizens of my kingdom won't do that. They're salt. And they're light. Are you a disciple of Jesus Christ this morning? Would you count yourself as a disciple of Jesus Christ this morning? Take a good look at what you've got going on. Because I'll tell you this, that if you are a disciple, this world might not like living with you, but it can't live without you.
What good is Christianity? Have the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth made the world a better place? Or is Christianity positively harmful, a menace to civilization, a threat to human survival, and the principal enemy of moral progress in the world? What does the historical record tell us? The world that Jesus was born into considered women socially and intellectually inferior. They were not permitted the same rights, privileges, and freedoms that men enjoyed. And in Jewish culture, women were not permitted to speak in public, especially in the presence of a man, which also meant she couldn't testify in a court of law. But the way Jesus treated women was revolutionary. Not only did he stand against the anti-female culture of his day, he also set a new standard of kindness, compassion, and respect. As a result, the early church included women, honored women, supported widows, and gave women a freedom and dignity previously unknown in any culture. In India, where widows were burned on their husbands' funeral pyres, it was the Christians who were largely responsible for getting this practice banned. In China, young girls were intentionally crippled by binding their feet. Again, it was the influence of the Christians that led the Chinese government to outlaw this practice. It's no exaggeration to say the birth of Jesus was the turning point in the history of woman. In the ancient Greek and Roman world, children were property. Babies, especially little girls, were often killed immediately after birth or abandoned to die of exposure. And what we call child abuse today was considered normal back then. Then Jesus appeared, and children became people. Christians opposed all forms of child abuse, rescued babies who had been left out to die, often adopting them into their own families. They taught the world to value and care for the youngest members of society. Christians were the first people in history to systematically fight against slavery. Slavery in the West was abolished largely because of the efforts of Christians like William Wilberforce in England and the abolitionists in America, most of whom were Christian ministers. These followers of Jesus reasoned that since we are all created equal in the eyes of God, no one has the right to rule another without their consent. Christianity provides the moral foundation not only of anti-slavery, but also of democracy. The freedom and opportunity enjoyed in the U.S. and other democracies is built on ideas furnished by the Judeo-Christian worldview. The belief in free will opposes tyranny and leads to a representative government. The understanding that man is sinful underscores the need for checks and balances and three branches of government. The idea of being governed by the rule of law rather than the authority of man flows from the Ten Commandments. Other Christian concepts like the dignity of labor, the existence of moral absolutes, fair trials with witnesses, and the importance of civil liberty are also crucial to our form of government and so easily taken for granted. Jesus was a teacher and instructed his followers to teach. So Christians developed schools and later monasteries, laying the groundwork for modern education. Christians founded 106 of the first 108 universities in the U.S. Ideas like tax-supported public schools, kindergarten, grade levels, secondary schools, modern colleges and universities, education for the deaf and the blind, literacy for the masses, and universal education that reaches beyond class, gender, and ethnicity all have one thing in common. They are all products of Christianity. It's hard to imagine life without the technological advances of modern science. Science, as we know it today, emerged hundreds of years ago during a period of unprecedented advances in mathematics, physics, astronomy, biology, and chemistry. The vast majority of these brilliant scientists, nearly every single one of them, were Christians. They believed that since the universe was created by a rational creator using rational rules, it ought to yield its secrets to rational creatures, using reason and observation. As a result, these early scientists searched for natural laws, confident that they existed, and they found them. Jesus' concern for all who suffered went above and beyond the social order of his day. In 252 A.D., the Christians of Corinth saved the city from a plague, risking their lives to help those who had been dragged out into the street and abandoned to die. Christian compassion for the poor and the sick led to institutions for lepers, and later monasteries dedicated to the care of the sick. These were the beginning of our modern hospitals. Christians were the driving force behind the creation of orphanages, care for the elderly, prison reform, labor reform, the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, and the YMCA. And charitable giving was a uniquely Christian innovation, giving rise to countless contemporary philanthropic organizations. Our modern-day conceptions of human rights and equality derive exclusively from the biblical idea found in Genesis that all people are created in the image of God. Expanding on this affirmation of human equality, the Apostle Paul wrote, "Now there is neither Jew nor Gentile, slave or free, male and female, but all are one in Christ Jesus." So much of what is good in our lives came about because 2,000 years ago, Jesus of Nazareth turned the world upside down. The historical record is unmistakably clear. No other cultural influence, no other social movement, no other teaching, philosophy, or religion has done more to promote the well-being of more people than Christianity.